Hi, I'm Debbie Prue, Executive Director of NAMI Pasco. Tonight we have a presentation from Mandi, who is one of our amazing volunteers, and I will let her introduce herself and her presentation.
Thanks, Debbie. My name is Mandi. I am a facilitator with NAMI Pasco. I work with the support groups, and I'm really excited to be here and tell my story. So let's get started. I was 12 years old the first time I tried to end my life. I was 18 when it worked. In those six years, I can't count the number of times I tried, and my parents never suspected any of it. Today I'm 41 years old, and it has been 20 years since I made an attempt to end my life. It has not, however, been 20 years since I thought about it, or 20 years since I had to talk myself out of it. This disease is with me forever. I know that. I've accepted it, but sometimes it makes me angry. In the 23 years since my suicide, I've experienced long periods of mental wellness and built a pretty wonderful life. I live in beautiful Florida. I have amazing friends. I have a fantastic husband. I'm a lawyer. I own a business. I'm a published author and public speaker, and I just became a real estate agent. I should be blissfully happy, but it's just not that simple, is it? Still, I consider myself mentally well as long as I'm self-aware and value my own life. As long as I have a survival instinct, I know that I'm miles ahead of where I would be without treatment. So let's talk about the journey. And please feel free to jump in with questions or comments. I never mind being interrupted during these talks, and it's important to me that you get something of value out of it, and that it's difficult if there's not a back and forth between us. And don't worry about raising your hand, because sometimes I won't see the thing pop up. So just hop in and say Mandi if you have something to say, and I'll yield the floor. So. People often ask me what happened to make me so depressed at 12 years old that I started wanting to kill myself. People want to hear that there was some trauma that caused my mental illness, because as long as they can protect themselves and their loved ones from that kind of trauma and not have to worry about mental illness, then they feel safer. If I was abused or kidnapped or orphaned at age 12, then it somehow all makes sense, right? Unfortunately, it doesn't make sense. Was my life perfect when I was 12? No. But there was nothing bad enough that my actions made sense. What happened was that my brain was just not working correctly. But at 12, I didn't know that. For all I knew, that was how all brains worked. In fact, that was exactly what I thought. I thought that everyone lived their life wanting to die, and that only the most brave actually did it. And I was going to be brave. So I didn't talk about feeling suicidal. It never occurred to me. If you think everyone feels the same way, and then there's really no reason to bring it up, right? I stole pills from my dad and tried different combinations trying to kill myself. Luckily, I didn't have the internet to look up what meds would work, and I never wanted to get in trouble for taking the pills, so I didn't steal too many. I thought for sure, though, that if a small girl took more prescription meds than a grown man was supposed to take, surely it would be fatal. Obviously, I was wrong. By high school, I wasn't hiding it from my friends anymore, but it was the 90s, and well, depression was in. It wasn't so much about wanting to die as it was about not caring if you lived. For most people, but for me, it was still a mission. In my last year of high school, I got a job at JCPenney where I made a friend named Bobby. She was a few years older than me, and she had already had a successful suicide attempt, but she'd been rescued. She taught me how to do it right, and I did it, but I was rescued too. After that, I was put on meds and started seeing a therapist. That was how I learned that not everyone felt the way I did, and there are ways to stop feeling that way. This was in 1999 when I got out of the hospital. And so I actually started watching Dr. Phil on Oprah every Tuesday. And as corny as it sounds, I think he helped me more than any therapist I ever had. My brain needed and needs medication, just like with many other illnesses. It manages the symptoms, but it doesn't cure them. So I need other coping mechanisms. Medicine alone, at least for me, wasn't enough. So the last 23 years have been a lot of trial and error with meds and coping mechanisms. One of the best things I learned from Dr. Phil was how to avoid wasting energy on toxic people. While the behavior of others doesn't cause my depression or anxiety, it can rob me of the energy I need to stay healthy. Mental illness is exhausting by itself. You don't need additional drains on your time and your energy. So here are a few tips. First, not everyone you meet deserves a place in your life, brain, or heart. And absolutely nobody has the right to one. Family, friend, coworker, neighbor, it doesn't matter. Removing toxic people from your life, or at least limiting your interactions with them, is a must if you want to manage your mental health. But we often ask ourselves, how do I know if it's them and not me? What if I remove people from my life when really I was the cause of the problem? Well, first of all, you have to ask yourself if it really matters. If the relationship is toxic, it is just what it is. It doesn't really matter why or whose fault it is. It may not be anybody's fault. You just don't work together. And the second thing is to stop expecting people to change just because you change. So most people's behavior is not affected by the way other people act, right? When I was a kid, I really wanted to have a good relationship with my father. And as an adult now, I know that that was never possible, that it didn't matter how good I did in school, or it didn't matter how smart I was, or even how pretty or talented or popular or well-behaved I was. It didn't matter, because the way he defined relationships was by control and not by any sort of mutual partnership. And so that was just not a good relationship to have, and it never was going to be. And so eventually I just had to put an end to it. My mother had a terrible relationship with her mother, and I remember every year we would go shopping for my grandmother like 3 times a year, right? You go for her birthday, her Mother's Day, and Christmas gifts every year for my grandmother. And every year my mother would go through the store and stress about what she was going to get for my grandmother, and whether or not my grandma would like it, and oh, this is perfect, doesn't this look just like her, and oh, I think she'll love this. And it didn't matter. We could have given my grandmother the Hope Diamond and she would have asked for a receipt. She didn't care what was in the box. She cared that the box came from my mother, and that she knew she could make my mother feel bad if she asked for the receipt as soon as she opened it. And so that's what she did every single time. And finally, after many, many months of Dr. Phil, I told my mother that. I said, look, Mom, it doesn't matter what you get your mother for Christmas. It really doesn't. Whatever you get her, she's never happy. She's never going to like it. Just give her money. If you feel like you have to give her something because she's your mother and she gives the kids money for, Christmas and birthdays and everything, then just give her an envelope of money and let her ask for the receipt for the cash, because it really just doesn't matter. Some people, you just can't change that relationship. So when I first started, being in treatment after my successful suicide attempt, that was a big part of the work I had to do, was sort of weeding the negative people out of my life. I had a lot of people who were taking a lot of advantage of me. I always sort of felt like there was no good reason that anyone would want to spend time with me unless there was a material reason. So unless I could buy stuff for them, or, when I was young, I was the one with a car. I was also the sober one, so I could always drive. So my car was a big attraction, I thought, for people to spend time with me. And so I offered that up all the time. I can drive, include me. I'll be the driver. I'll be the designated driver. Oh, let's all go out to get ice cream. Oh, nobody has money. That's okay. Mandy will pay, because I just wanted people to be near me. I wanted quantity, not quality. And when we started this, just before we started this, Mark actually mentioned the difference in quantity versus quality, and that it's much more important to have quality people than it is to have a large number of people. But when you're a teenager, you look at numbers, right? You look at how lonely you appear to the world. And so I really had a lot of work to do. I was 18 when I overdosed successfully. I was in the parking lot of my ex-boyfriend's apartment complex. Some of that was for dramatic flair. I felt like I was angry with him, and I wanted him to be the one that had to find me and had to deal with all of that. There was also a part of me that thought it would be almost like a gift to him. The part of me that still wanted to do nice things for him thought it would be a gift to him to find me. Um, and so I was in the parking lot of his apartment complex when I overdosed, and I took everything, took all the pills that I took and fell asleep. And then I woke up, and when I woke up, I figured it didn't work. So I got out of the car, and I was too dizzy to drive. Like I was still really groggy and dizzy. And the funny thing is, when I think back about these times, like I was always so concerned about making my father angry at me, that like if this didn't work, I didn't want to make him mad. And so when I got out of the car and I didn't feel like I could drive, I knew that he would be furious if I crashed the car, because he's a car guy. And so the car was like, that was his thing. He put this car together for me. He gave it to me. And if I crashed the car, I knew he would be furious. And so I didn't want to risk driving home. And this was before cell phones. So I went into my boyfriend's apartment complex, and I went to his upstairs neighbor. He wasn't home. So I went up to his upstairs neighbor, and I knocked on her door, and I asked if I could use her phone. And I used her phone to call my mom and say, Mom, I'm parked outside of my ex-boyfriend's apartment. I'm not feeling well. Can you come get me? I need a ride home. Hung up the phone with my mom, and apparently passed out in this girl's apartment. Her name was Sarah. But I woke up from passing out in her apartment and went back down to my car, and Sarah called 911. And so my poor mother, who, is constantly paranoid that every time she hears sirens, it's one of her kids, was driving to come get me, and saw the lights and heard the sirens, and, all in the direction that she's heading, and actually thought to herself, well, that can't be Mandi, because I just talked to her and she's fine. And I'm going to get her. She just didn't feel well. And then she gets there, and of course it is me. And so the ambulance had shown up. I have zero memory. I remember leaving Sarah's apartment. I remember coming downstairs and getting in my car and getting out a cigarette, and taking the cigarette and lighting it and starting to walk towards the corner so that like I could meet my mother at the corner and she wouldn't have to come like into the complex. I like can see it was raining. Like I can see myself watching me put one foot in front of the other because I was so unsteady. And then I don't know what happened, but somehow I ended up, the ambulance, the EMT said that I was back at my car when they found me, and I was like half in and half out of my car. So I have no idea what really happened between then. My heart stopped. They had to restart my heart. They put me in the hospital. I was in the hospital for, I want to say probably like 3 days total. I didn't wake up until the day after it happened. And I woke up and was furious that I was in the hospital because I thought, man, this worked this time. And then somebody stopped it from working, and somebody made me come back to life. And so I was really mad when I woke up. And I remember my parents being there, and I remember just yelling and trying to rip all the tubes out of me and everything. And they put you, after you're stable medically, then they put you in the psych ward, which is not something I had ever experienced before. I was rather lucky. The hospital that they put me in had actually a pretty nice psych floor, and I had my own room, and the people that worked there were very nice, and my parents were able to come visit me for the few days that I was there, and I even had one of my friends was able to come visit me. But this was the first time that anybody said to me that your brain isn't supposed to behave this way. that you're not supposed to feel like you want to die every single day, because I really did think that that was just how everybody's brain worked. And so this, at age 18, it was just before New Year's when I overdosed. So it was the very end of 1998. This was the first time in my life that I thought, that I learned that this was not, quote, normal, right? When I came out of the hospital, I was in college at the time. I had started college in the fall of 98. I had gotten through my first semester before this happened, and I had done okay in school. You know, that was one of the things, was like, my parents never had a clue that any of this was happening, right? Because they were, I was doing good in school through all of this. I had really good grades. I was participating in things, and you know, I didn't look like somebody who was suicidal, but from my perspective, that was because I thought everybody was suicidal and everybody was still doing these things. Everybody was still trying to get good grades. Everybody was still participating in things. Everybody still cared if they had friends or not. But we all also, you know, didn't want to be around any longer than we absolutely had to be. And it doesn't sound logical, and it's not logical. And, you know, that's part of mental illness that people don't always understand, is you can't logic somebody out of mental illness, right? You can't explain to them, well, this doesn't make any sense. You know, when I made that first successful attempt on my life, I called in sick to work. Like, why did I do that? What did I care if I got fired for not showing up to work, right? It didn't make any sense. I was worried about where I did it. So I didn't want to park my car someplace illegally, because I didn't want my car to get towed, because again, I know my dad would be angry. I didn't want to be in a bad neighborhood, because I knew my dad would be angry if I left my car in a bad neighborhood. And so, you know, I did it at, like I said, outside my ex-boyfriend's house, which was in a good neighborhood, in a parking lot, where I was completely legal. But how silly, like, what silly things to be concerned about when you're not even concerned whether or not you're going to live through the day. And in fact, hoping that you don't live through the day. It's beyond what most people can comprehend if they've never been through it. And I know that most of the people that are here tonight have been through it and understand it. But I also am sure that you have tried to explain it to people who haven't been through it. And it's very difficult, right? So one of the things that I started using as sort of a way to kind of, a metaphor to kind of explain it to people, was color blindness. So when you look at a person who's colorblind, you can't tell that they're colorblind. There's nothing on the exterior that shows it. The color blindness is actually in your brain, right? It has to do with your eyes and the connection between your eyes and your brain. But nobody can see it. And so a person looked totally normal, but they're colorblind. And if you ask a person who's colorblind to explain to you what the world looks like to them compared to what it looks like to you, that's like impossible, because they've never seen the world how it looks to you. So they can't explain how it looks to them. They can't explain the differences when they don't know, right? And if you try to do the same thing, if you try to explain to a colorblind person like what the color purple looks like, there aren't really words to do that. There's not a way to describe to somebody who can't see a color what a color looks like. It's just something that you either see or you don't see. And so when you're talking to somebody that has a mental illness, it's kind of the same thing. This is how the world looks to us. And you can try to explain how the world looks to you, but we're not going to get it, because we're not in it. This is the world that we're in. This is what it looks like. And so, you know, over the years, I started, first it's a huge struggle, right? Like at first when you start on medication and you start going to therapy, it's a huge struggle. And I ended up flunking out of college. Even though I was in treatment, I flunked out of college because I just couldn't get myself together, right? I was on meds, and the meds were making me tired, and they were making it hard for me to concentrate. I remember I used to go to work, and like I would nap in the changing rooms at work, and just hide and hope nobody caught me and I didn't get fired. And I didn't. Nobody did. I didn't get fired. And I would just, try to like stay awake through my day. There was no ability to really excel at anything I was working on. And so eventually, when you flunk out of college for 2 semesters in a row, they send you a lovely letter that says, thanks for trying, please don't ever come back. And in the 90s and early 2000s, flunking out of college meant no health insurance. Back then, you could only stay on your parents' health insurance if you were in college. And so I was 20, let's see, 19. I was 20 years old when I flunked out of college. And so the only way that I could have stayed on my parents' health insurance after that was if I continued to go to college somewhere. So I signed up for community college just so that I would have health insurance. And as awful as it was that you had to be in, that there was this precursor to having health insurance, was that you had to be in school, which means that the people who need the health insurance the most, who are the sickest, are the least likely to have it. For me, it ended up being a good thing because it forced me to stay in society, and it forced me to have to try to at least maintain my way through community college. So I went to community college for a year, and I actually did really well. By the time I had started community college, I was almost 2 years into my treatment. So it was the fall of I'm terrible with years, fall of 2000. So I had started treatment sort of at the end of 1998. So the end of 99 was my 1-year mark, and the end of 2000 would have been my 2-year mark. So I was pretty close to that 2-year mark of treatment. I had been through a couple of different medications. I had been doing therapy. I had been learning from Dr. Phil. And so I had been getting better. And I went back to school, went to community college, and I did really well. I really enjoyed it. The world looked totally different to me. And the way I found out sort of that I was better, or that I was at least, on the road to wellness, was I was in the car with a couple of my friends. I was in the back seat, and somebody almost hit us in an intersection. And my friend had to like slam on the brakes, and we swerved, and it was one of those really dramatic, like almost really bad accidents. And I was in the backseat, and I remember grabbing onto my other friend's wrist and being afraid. And then when the car finally stopped and we were okay, being glad that I was alive. And I had never, ever in my life been glad to be alive. It was the first time. And so I will never forget that moment. I had never had a survival instinct, never felt what it was like to be happy, to be glad that I was there to see another day. And that has sort of become my goalpost, right? If I lose that feeling, I know I'm in trouble. I know I need to go get more help. So went to community college. Doesn't fix everything, right? I still had a lot of toxic people in my life. I was still learning some really tough lessons. I ended up being in an abusive relationship, and had some violence in the apartment that I was living in, and it was not a safe place for me. And so I ended up living in my car for a while. I had made such a big deal about moving out on my own into my own apartment that, you know, my father was not very inclined to let me come back home, to say, oops, I made a mistake and let me come back home. And my name was on the lease, so I couldn't rent another place. I had to keep paying for the lease, where this man was living, but I couldn't stay there. So I lived in my car for a couple of months, and this sounds very silly, but grew up in Buffalo, New York, and it was in the winter, and I was in a white car. And so it is kind of dangerous to be parked in a white car on the side of the road in Buffalo when it's snowing, because plows will come down the road and can't see you. And so I had to be very careful about where I parked. And so I was working still because I needed to pay my bills. So I was working for Blockbuster, believe it or not, and I was managing a store for Blockbuster. And so I used to stay there. I used to stay at the Blockbuster in my car overnight, so that I wasn't on the side of the road. And I knew when the plows would come through the parking lot so that I could, you know, wake up and move my car. And those, you're a little less likely to blend in with piles of snow when you're parked in the middle of a parking lot than you are when you're out on the side of the street. So I lived in my car for a few months, and then eventually my lease was up, and I was able to move back into my parents' house, and came to Florida to finish school. I had gotten my grades up enough in community college for that first year that I was able to come to Florida and go to Florida Atlantic. I went to Florida Atlantic, and it was the best decision I've ever made, probably. Getting away from where I was, coming to someplace beautiful, starting new, starting fresh with new people, having a whole new outlook, being healthy. You know, it was really a good place for me to be in. And I kind of expected that everything was going to be fine after then. You know, that I went through college. I did really well in college. I really liked it. I went to law school. I did pretty well in law school too. I really liked that. I made friends. You know, things were good. At the very end of law school, I started a relationship with who is now my husband. And him and I had grown up together. I had had a crush on him since middle school. So, you know, I was just in a very good place when I graduated from law school and moved back to Florida and had a good job, and, you know, everything was really great. And then all of a sudden those feelings come back. All of a sudden you're driving home from work and you think, you know, gee, I might like to just drive into that tree and just end everything. Or, you know, maybe it's time to take those pills again. Or, you know, you have those thoughts and those feelings that come back to you. And sometimes as much as you would think that the high levels of success would take away those feelings, sometimes they increase those feelings, because you start to feel like, well, that's it, I'm done, right? I accomplished what I wanted to accomplish, and it doesn't feel like I'm a movie star like I wanted it to feel. And I don't have a next step that I want to do. And so I'm just done. And so, you know, it was very difficult for me the first couple of years out of law school. My depression came back pretty bad. I managed well, and, you know, I did my job, and I kept on medication, and I, you know, did what I was supposed to do and survived it and made it through, and mostly kept it to myself, because I didn't want people to worry. You know, after that, my most serious attempt, my mom and my sister were always very afraid of it happening again. So I didn't want them to think it was going to happen again. So I didn't really tell anybody that I was having a hard time then. And then the job I had right after law school was for 2 years only. And so after those 2 years, I moved to Tampa. I'd been in Orlando for 2 years. I moved to Tampa, got a new job and a new doctor. And this new doctor was the first person to ever tell me that sometimes it's better to be on more than one medication because medications work well together to deal with different kind of symptoms. And so I was having panic attacks and depression. And they had been moving me from one medicine to another, trying to find something that worked. And this doctor was the first one to try putting two medicines together. And I cannot tell you the difference that made when I finally had a doctor that understood how I felt and understood these sort of dueling mental illnesses that I was dealing with, this panic disorder and the depression, and how they work together and how the medicines could work together to help me. So I started doing a lot better once I got on those, on the combination of two medications. And I'm still on a combination of two medications. The meds have changed, doses have changed over time, but I still am on a combination. And it has consistently been better for me. So, you know, I come to Tampa, I get on these new meds, I'm feeling really so much better. I make some really great friends, buy a house. My husband and I we weren't married at the time, but Corey and I, we were doing great. Our relationship was great. You know, and things were pretty good. My job was very, very stressful, and I was, you know, scared a lot of times that I was going to lose it. The job, that is. But overall, you know, things were pretty positive and I was doing pretty well. And then I think I was probably I was in my early 30s. I can't tell you exactly what year, but I was in my early 30s. And one of my friends from high school had a baby, and I went up to go visit her. And her and I had both suffered from suicidal depression, and we had actually both had successful attempts, is what I call it. The attempts that actually landed us in the hospital and actually risked us losing our lives. We had both had those around the same time growing up. And so we had, you know, sort of been on this mental health journey together for a long time. And so I went up to visit her, and I remember thinking, you know, her life seemed very hard. She was living in Connecticut, and it was very expensive. They were very, you know, her house was small, but it was more expensive than my house, which was like at least twice the size of where she was. And you know, she had kids, and she had a husband who drank a lot, and her life just seemed really, really hard to me. And we're sitting there talking the one night, and she tells me that she hasn't been on meds for over 2 years, and that she was doing fine. And, you know, there are a lot of meds that you can stay on while you're pregnant. So it wasn't just because she was pregnant and had kids. It was because she told me it was because she was better. And so I was mad. I remember being really mad that she could be off of medication and she's fine, and her life is so much harder than mine. And I have, you know, this dream life. This is exactly what I always wanted. I'm exactly where I always wanted to be, and I can't be off of medication. So even though I intellectually knew better, I took myself off of meds. I came back from that trip and just took myself off of meds. And I honestly can't remember how many weeks it was off meds that I was driving home from work and did think to myself, I'm gonna, when I get off this exit, I'm gonna drive into that tree. Like, I knew in my head where the tree was that I was going to drive into and end my life. And I caught myself. Luckily, I stopped myself, and I thought, whoa, wait a minute. This is not an okay thought to have. This is not an okay place to be. And I drove home, did not drive into a tree, and immediately started reaching out to my friends and telling them I cannot be alone. I need people to be with me. I'm not safe. I'm not safe by myself. And so my friends rallied, and I was not alone. I went back to the doctor, got myself put back on meds, slowly, like you're supposed to, and not just didn't just start taking them again. I did it the right way. And my friends, man, they showed up, right? They were either at my house or I was at their house, and we were doing things, and people were making sure that even when Corey was on the road and I was home alone, that I was never really alone. And it took a couple of weeks of that sort of intensive being cared for intensively by people that loved me, and getting back on medicine before I was stable again. At this point in my life, here I am. I'm 23 years out from that first successful attempt, and unfortunately, I am still on medication, and I will be for the rest of my life. I've accepted that. I understand it. I know it to be true. It still makes me angry sometimes. It still is frustrating to me that no matter how successful I am, or no matter how hard I work, or no matter what accolades I get or whatever, that my brain is still going to tell me that my life is not worth it. And that if I don't have some help, that my brain is going to tell me to drive into trees. It still makes me angry a lot of the time. And it's difficult because I chose a profession, just happenstance, chose to be a lawyer, where there is a lot of substance abuse and a lot of mental illness and a lot of stigma around it, and a lot of fear in sort of admitting to having these issues. So one of the things that I have done in the last couple of years, I actually went to an event. I went to a bar association event that was about mental health. It was a town hall event, and the lawyers that led the event were talking about mental health and how serious it was and what a problem it was in the legal community, and how scary it was. And we had 4 very prominent lawyers who had committed suicide in the last few years. And it was all very shocking to the legal community. They were very prominent, very successful male attorneys. And for some reason, people think of depression as being more of a female thing than a male thing. So nobody suspected that these people were depressed in any way. And then all of a sudden they were just gone. And so the Florida Bar Association started this sort of movement to address mental health. And I went to this event, and I remember the speaker saying that she just didn't understand how anybody could feel like there was no other choice than to end their life, how anybody could get to that point. And so I raised my hand and stood up and said, I know exactly how that feels. And they said, well, we need you then, because we need somebody who's willing to admit that they know how that feels. And so I started speaking about mental health to lawyers all over the state. And it was an incredible experience. I have learned in the last maybe 5 or 6 years that the thing that helps me the most is helping other people. And so doing things like this, and doing things like that, being able to talk to rooms full of lawyers that want to talk about this but just don't know how to start the conversation, has really made a huge difference. And then once I was out there talking to lawyers, people would hear me, and I ended up talking to non-lawyers as well. I ended up going to events that were, presented to the general public. I wound up talking to some students in some venues, some younger children, talking to people just of all ages and walks of life, talking to people who are parents of those who suffer from mental illness, people who have lost people to mental illness, people who suffer from it themselves, and trying to help to sort of bridge the gap between what people think mental illness is and what it really is, and what people think it should look like and what it really looks like. And I have the ability, and I don't know where it comes from, but I have somewhat of the ability to be able to look at an exchange between two people, a person who's well and a person who is unwell, and sort of explain, sort of bring those two people together, explain to them why this person sees the world this way and why this person sees the world the other way, and why neither of them are wrong, and that the solution to the problem is not to make you both see the same thing, to sort of merge those two worlds together. The solution to the problem is for you both to say, you know what, your truth is true and my truth is true, because we're both looking at things from different perspectives. We have different brains. The way we are seeing things is different, and that's okay. And we can still help each other to feel better and do better. And we don't have to spend so much time trying to convince each other that we're right and the other person is wrong. And so that's sort of, that's kind of where my story leads, is that I ended up being able to find meaning in my experience. I ended up being able to share it with lots of people who needed it to be shared, who needed to hear somebody say it, who needed to hear a lawyer stand up and say it and not be afraid that I was going to lose my law license or lose all my clients or lose my business or, you know, any of those things. And then to be able to take that beyond the legal community and talk to others. I can't tell you how much that helps, really, really helps my recovery, which is continuous. My recovery will never end. And it improves my well-being. And last year I was lucky enough to find NAMI Pasco and find the support groups that NAMI Pasco does. And I went to a support group meeting, an online support group meeting. It was post-COVID, and so everything had been taken online. And so, you know, I joined one of those meetings, and that was even more amazing and more helpful, because not only did it give me the opportunity to help other people, gave me the opportunity to have other people help me. It made room for me to learn coping mechanisms that I had never thought of before, and to share my coping mechanisms with other people, and even to just listen and be there for somebody else. It really, really improved my own mental health and my own view of the world. And so I became a facilitator for those support groups. And so at least once a week, I am in a support group as a facilitator, but also as a participant, and learning coping mechanisms from my peers who are going through similar things or very different things. Some mental illness is, you know, very different. There's all kinds, and it's very different for everybody, and the experience is different for everybody. And so I just get to learn so much, and it makes me feel so much better. If I'm having a bad day, if I've had a bad week, coming on to those meetings is really just, it's such a release. Like, it's such a comfort to be with those people, and to be able to share how I feel and listen to how they're doing, and have this back and forth. And so, you know, I think at the end of all of this, you know, all the struggle, and it's still there. It's still every day. I still, you know, every day I wake up and I take my meds, and I hope that it's going to be a good day. There have been months at a time where I have had panic attacks every day, you know, for months on end. There have been times that my depression has come back, and I haven't been able to get out of bed for weeks at a time. Luckily, I have a job that I can do from my bed, So I'm able to, work on my computer and not necessarily have to be feeling well or leaving the house or going out and about, and still be able to have an income and not be fired. And now I work for myself, so I have even more ability to sort of listen to my body and my brain and work as my body and my brain let me. But all of this ends up in sharing your story and being able to have a platform to do that, whether it is a group therapy session or a public speaking event or just amongst your friends. Being able to share your story, I think, is really, really helpful. And so, I share my story so that people see that it can be done and not be harmful. And you can survive and you can come out on the other end of it. And I hope that it encourages other people to be able to do that. I have a lot of people tell me that I'm brave for doing this. It doesn't feel brave to me because it feels to me like it's obvious. Like I wear my mental health on my head, like there's a sign that says, suicidal on my head. It doesn't feel like a secret to me. But so many people did not have any idea until I started speaking publicly, did not have any idea that I had been through what I had been through and that I had the issues that I have. And so I was able to open some minds and change some perspectives. And that's been really helpful to me, and I think helpful to others. And so I'm really glad to have that opportunity. And I'm glad to have that opportunity here to do that with all of you. And to whoever is watching this recording afterwards, I hope that something that I've said here has sort of clicked with you, and made you think that, what you're feeling is either something that you can get help with, something that you should get help with, but something that you can talk about and something that you can share. And I hope that people listening to me realize that they can have control over their environment in a way that allows them to take better care of themselves mentally, right? So it takes energy to take care of your mental health. And if you're wasting that energy on dealing with toxic people and toxic situations that you don't have to be dealing with, then you're taking away from your ability to take care of yourself. And I find that the best way to motivate me to take care of me is to think of myself not just as Mandi, but to think I'm taking care of Corey's wife. I'm taking care of Jesse's sister. I'm taking care of my mom's daughter, because I know that those people need me and rely on me, and that when I'm taking time out for myself, even if it's time away from them, I'm doing a service for them. I'm not depriving them of my time. I'm making me better so that when I am with them, I can be a better person. And so when you're dealing with these things and you have to take time out, you have to take time out. I mean, it's just a fact. You have to take time out. Don't feel guilty for the things you're missing. Think about how you're improving yourself so that the next thing you participate in, the next thing that you do with your friends, or the next time somebody needs you, you are a stronger person because you have cultivated your own well-being, and you've taken care of yourself, and you've made sure that you have the energy to deal with those things. And think about that too when you're spending time doing things that are not healthy, when you're spending time dealing with toxic people, that you are using energy that could be saved up for those people that really deserve your time and your love and your support. If I'm wasting my time with a friend who is not a good friend to me, then I'm taking time away from people like my husband and my mom and my sisters. And those are the people that support me the most and deserve my time. And so you start to sort of realize that your energy and your time is a limited commodity, and you need to protect that You need to protect that for yourself, and you need to protect that for the people that deserve to be in your life and deserve to experience your love and support and deserve to have that opportunity. And you need to protect yourself from people and situations that are only toxic to that. And that, you know, that includes people that are toxic, and it includes things that are toxic literally and figuratively, you know, substances that are toxic. I know that it's a huge problem for people with mental health issues to get addicted to alcohol or other drugs, prescription medications even. And, you know, you got to think about, when you're putting those things in your body, what are you taking away from yourself? You're taking away some of your ability to be strong. You're taking away some of your own strength. You're taking away some of your own your body's natural protection mechanisms. You're taking away time that you could be spending building up that strength rather than just hiding the way you feel with substances. So, you know, everything that you do, it's important to look at and say, this is my limited amount of me, and how am I going to spend this limited amount of me? How am I going to be the best daughter, sister, friend, brother, father, husband, whatever that I can be, if I'm giving away my energy to these toxic people and things? And no matter who you are, and no matter how isolated you may feel, there are people that will love you even if you haven't found them yet. And so it's worth spending the time to find them. And there are people that do love you that you probably don't even realize are there. There are people that would miss you if you stopped showing up to things. So, you know, pay attention to those people. Think about, you know, when you're thinking about that you're not worth the time and effort that it takes to deal with your own mental illness, think about the people that would be disappointed if you stopped. That is usually the best motivator to keep you going and working towards taking care of yourself and making sure that you're there for another day. So I have officially talked for almost an entire hour and nobody has interrupted me. So if anybody has anything that they want to say or ask.
I just wanted to say thank you for sharing your story. I found it very inspiring and it gives me hope. And I related to some of the things you said in a way that I've never related to people before. So thank you.
Thank you. That makes me so happy, Avery. I'm so happy to have you in my life. Okay, well, if nothing else, then I guess I'll hand it back over to Debbie.
Well, thank you so much, Mandi. You did amazing, and I really appreciate you sharing with us.